from Australia, Denmark, Israel, Japan, New Zealand, Northern Ireland, Republic of Ireland, Singapore, South Africa, United Kingdom, Thailand, the Philippines, United States, and throughout the world. You're watching Moriel TV.
Greetings, dear friends. Blessings in Jesus. My name is Jacob Prasch from Moriel Ministries. Quick answers for quick questions. There's much controversy today, and indeed there has been for some time, concerning the issues of coiffure, hairstyles, cosmetics, makeup, jewelry, and also potential paganistic symbolism of jewelry for Christians. This has led to all kinds of confusion and all kinds of rival opinions among various churches and denominations, even to the point where they have rule books. What do the scriptures really teach? It comes down to resolving a fundamental question in the New Testament. Why does Paul say Christian women should not have braided hair and cosmetics and things like jewelry in his particular perspective? And why does Peter say it is acceptable, but don't do that only? In other words, adorn yourself modestly. In fact, Peter does not say only. That is an interpolation added by translators to communicate a diminutive in Greek, something that you can't translate exactly into English. Peter is saying you can do it, but do it modestly, while Paul is saying we shouldn't essentially do it at all. What is the difference? The difference is culture. The principle of modest dress applies to all Christians, all places, all times, all cultures. What modest dress is, however, can vary from place to place. Paul's prohibition had to do with the fact that he was writing to Greek churches where cosmetics and jewelry were the wardrobe and the uniform identifying a woman as a hieros gamos, as a temple prostitute, as a cult prostitute, consecrated to the idolatrous worship of a pagan god by surrogate communication via sexual copulation that you paid for. Temple prostitution. That was the uniform. That's how you knew she was a temple prostitute. It was essentially the emblem and identifying uniform of a whore. Jewish culture, not so. Peter, writing to Jews, allows it modestly. He's drawing on the imagery of things such as the Song of Solomon, the Shir Shirim, the bride adorned for her husband. The book of Revelation takes the imagery from the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Song of Solomon, and recycles it for the return of Christ and the church being the bride, with Jesus being the bridegroom, the bride adorned for her husband. It's using a Jewish marital image. In Jewish culture, it was not the uniform of a prostitute. It's the culture that defined what the uniform was. The doctrinal principle is don't wear the wrong uniform. There are places in India, even rural India to this day, where men wear a frock and women wear trousers. For a male to wear trousers and a woman to wear a frock would indicate the woman was of a lesbian persuasion and the male a homosexual. So the males wear a frock and the women wear trousers. That culture defines it. What we're told in Corinthians is don't look like a homosexual. Don't look that way. The length of hair. Oh, wait a minute. In the Jewish culture, the length of hair, the vow of a Nazirite, that did not mean looking like a woman. However, in the Greco-Roman culture, it did. The principle, don't resemble homosexuals or seek to be identified with them in your manner of dress, that applies to all believers in all places. But what that uniform of a homosexual or a lesbian is, that can vary from time to time and place to place. Prior to the 1960s and into the early 1960s, in places like Earl's Court in London and Christopher Street in Greenwich Village in Manhattan and Castro Street in San Francisco, an earring on a male identified a male as a homosexual to another homosexual. That is how they identified themselves, by wearing an earring. Today, an earring means nothing. Heterosexual males commonly wear earrings since the 1960s. It simply does not mean what it once did. At one time, it would have been identifying yourself as a homosexual. That's not the case today. The problem is not the earring. The problem is what the earring means in a given cultural context. Again, in Old Testament Israel, the sons of Israel took their earrings and melted them down to pure unbeaten gold to make the Holy Ark. They were worn as ornaments and as cosmetics. Isaiah refers to a kind of amulet, where we get the word charm. Now, a charm bracelet today is simply jewelry. It's decorative. It's nothing but an ornament. However, there are other cultural contexts in the ancient world where they were used to ward off evil spirits, or charms would be used to bring good luck or to conjure some kind of demonic power or something of this nature. It's not the bracelet in itself or a charm bracelet in itself. It's what the charm bracelet meant in the given cultural context. Let's look at this. The Magen David, the Star of David. Some people in their ignorance will tell you that's demonic. It was a pagan star. It's the same as a pentagram, only it has 6 points and it was used in pagan worship. Well, let's look at this issue. The first symbol of the early church was not the cross. The first symbol of the early church was the fish. However, we know from the Old Testament, and we know from the archaeological digs in places like Heraklion in Crete, that the religion of the ancient Philistines, a seafaring people who largely made their living from the sea and from fishing, was the worship of Dagon, a demon god. The Dagons fell down before the holy ark of Yahweh in the Old Testament, in the days of King David, etc. Well, let's understand this. The mitre came from Dagon worship, worn by Roman Catholic bishops. Dagon worship was pagan, and his symbol was the fish. He was the fish god. But with the early church, it was Ichthus, Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior, and an acronym. It was a way that believers in Jesus identified themselves to each other. In one context, it's something demonic and pagan. Another context, the fish is something Christian. In the 4th, 5th century BC, when the Celts first arrived in the British Isles and came to England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, from continental Europe, in their worship, they had the Celtic cross. It had to do with sun worship. The priests of the Druid sects had these Celtic crosses. Patrick, a missionary to Ireland, confronted the Druid priests. Their symbol was again the cross. In the Christian context, however, the cross represented the crucifixion of Jesus, the gospel, and the Christian life. Pick up your cross and follow him. In one context, it was a pagan symbol. In another context, the cross is a Christian symbol, the same as the fish. It is no different with the Star of David, the Magen David. In Hebrew, it's not called a Star of David. It's called a Shield of David, Magen David. It represents Yahweh's protection of Israel. One of the interpretations given to it for its adoption is it is the configuration of the tribes of Israel around the Holy Ark, representing divine protection. It's not even a star to the Jews. It is a shield representing God's protection. In one context, it is something pagan. In another context, it is not. The actual ancient symbol of the ancient Hebrews was a menorah, a candelabra. It was not the shield of David, the Magen David. In my youth, the American space program had Mercury, then Gemini, then Apollo. When they began putting 2 astronauts in the same capsule, that was Gemini. Then there was Apollo. These were simply project names for the American space program to get to the moon by NASA. In ancient Greece, however, these were deities. They were pagan gods. They were idols. They corresponded to what the New Testament calls the powers of the air. There was something demonic. Gemini and Mercury and Apollo, these were gods, demon gods. Paul tells us they are demonoi in Greek. In the ancient culture of the Greeks, they meant one thing. In the 20th and 21st century, they meant something completely different that had nothing to do with belief in an ancient Greek deity or a god associated with a planet or celestial body. Nothing. It is what a symbol means in its cultural context that determines whether it is right or wrong, good or bad, acceptable or unacceptable. Be that a fish, a cross, or the Star of David, the Shield of David, the Magen David. People who are protesting to the contrary are doing so without a firm biblical basis for doing so, and they're acting out of their ignorance. They may be sincere, but essentially they're either ignorant people or just ignorant people who are additionally religious cranks. They should be ignored. They should not be paid any attention to. Such people who have these attitudes about makeup and coiffures and cosmetics and jewelry, they confuse holiness with legalism. Holiness has nothing to do with legalism. It's not what a symbol is or a hairstyle is in and of itself. It's what it means in a given cultural setting, a historical context, what the scripture calls its Sitzimleben. To Peter, it was acceptable for a believing woman to adorn herself modestly. In the Greek culture to whom Paul was writing, don't do that. You'll look like them. Don't look like a whore, which unfortunately many of the Christian televangelists who are women do. I think it's a disgrace the way that these female televangelists look. The world sees it and sees them looking whorish. That's what the world thought of Tammy Baker. It's what the world thinks of Jan Crouch and of the earring lady, the Joyce Meyer. The world looks at this and they think it's disgusting and laughable. Well, Paul is saying, don't do that. Don't do the Paula White thing. Look at how many of the women over the years who've disgraced the name of Christ have been caught up in this kind of flamboyance that Paul warned about. Amy Simple McPherson, open scandal. I believe that God at some point did actually use Catherine Coleman, but she ran off with another woman's husband, a worship leader in her church. Tammy Baker. One scandal after another. Women out of control. This is the Jezebel spirit. It goes way back to Ahab and Jezebel. These women are not in the character of what the bride of Christ should be. Don't look gaudy. Don't look whorish. Don't look like something the world is going to identify you as a cheap woman unbefitting the name of Christ. But that's what's going on today. The principle will always be the same, doctrinally and theologically. Adorn yourself modestly. The meaning of a symbol is determined by its time and culture. It does not transcend time. It's just an object with no power in itself other than the power people ascribe to it. Now look, if there's obviously occult objects, they should be burned and destroyed as they were in the book of Acts. When people are involved in Freemasonry and they become saved, I urge them to burn their books, their aprons, and so forth. Obviously, horoscopes, Ouija boards, people should burn this stuff. But jewelry? Or space programs? Names like Apollo and Gemini? Or a Star of David, or a fish, or a cross? This is legalistic insanity masquerading as holiness and sanctification. It's nothing to do with holiness or sanctification. It's to do with ignorance and superstition. We have to be scriptural. Scriptural is don't be worldly. Don't look like the world. My name is Jacob Prasch. God bless you and thank you.